Well, it's good to be with you, Maya, again, always. We were talking earlier about how far back we go, over 40 years together. Good to be with all of you. And I see friends, people that I've known for many, many years as well. And let me be one of the first to say Merry Christmas. You know, with the pandemic and all the things taking place, perhaps you're like we are. And I know Maya was talking about this with her blue lights, that day right after Thanksgiving, we put up our Christmas tree, and we ended up putting out lights outside that we've never done before. So we're involved in the festivities of the holiday. We're cloistered as we do it, as many of you are, but in that cloistering, we are certainly united and we are one. Well, today we continue our series, A Creed of the Heart, with the third lesson, which is entitled Our Race is Human. And you remember the first time we were together to talk about the Creed of the Heart, I said I was going to give you a brief summary of each one of those statements in the first lesson. Our God is love, our race is human, our religion is oneness. And then thereafter, in the ensuing lessons, when we got together, that we would take one of the statements and we would just expand on it. And so that's what we're doing today. We're taking this one statement, our race is human, and we're expanding upon it. And when we were together at first and we had that quick summary, I talked about demographics. I gave an example, for instance, of how humanity is always separating itself. We separate ourselves according to religions and cultures and nationalities, sometimes cities with sports teams, and pigmentation of our skin. And I said, that has to end. We need to begin to find a way to come together. And here in the United States, we've had a census in 2020. And one of the questions they always ask is, what is your race? And so is Caucasian, or if it's African, Asian, Latino, the Native American here in the States. Matter of fact, here up in the mountains of Georgia, where Nancy and I are living, there was somebody that came by the house. And they were standing outside on the driveway, and we were standing on the porch, keeping our separation from one another. And he was asking us questions. And he could tell by looking at us that we were Caucasian. But he had to ask the question. It was part of his job. And so Nancy and I said to him that we wanted him to write down, we were very serious about this. We didn't want him to write down Caucasian because there had been too much of this separation. We wanted him to write down that our race is human. And when we filled in our census, that's what we wrote, and hopefully that he would do the same. And that's kind of the focus, main focus from the lesson some months ago when we talked about the kind of a brief touch on each one of these statements. And today we want to move from that and go a little bit deeper, because we are born of water and spirit, as Jesus said. The water obviously is our humanity, and spirit, that's the spiritual awakening that's before us. And certainly there is a divinity about us. Story, there's a family, mother and father, they have two sons, and one is a young teenage boy, and the other is a boy about 9 or 10. And the young teenage boy has a medical problem, and he needs a blood transfusion. And the younger brother has the same blood type. And so the parents sit with the doctor and the young boy, and they explain to him a blood transfusion, and they ask if he would be willing to donate his blood to his brother. And so he looks a little puzzled, but he says, okay. And so the day of the procedure is actually underway, and the doctor comes by, and he's near the boy, and the boy looks at him, and I want you to hear this question. The boy asks this question of the doctor: when am I going to die? And, the doctor's taken back by that, and because, the blood transfusion doesn't result in death, but the doctor gets it. And it is an expression of our divinity, because the boy he believes, he doesn't understand the transfusion, and he believes that by giving his blood to his brother that he's going to die. And the amazing thing is he's willing to do it. And that speaks about a divine potential that is within each one of us. And of course, part of our life here is to express that divinity. But we are also born of water. There is our humanity, and it plays a role as well. And we want to talk about that today under this heading of Our Race is Human. So I want to read to you something called The Invitation. It's from the Araya Mountain Dreamers book. It's kind of long, but I want to read it to you. And as I do, I want you to see if you can condense it into just some short statement. This invitation is asking something of us. And see if you can determine what you hear it ask you. So this is the invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing, it doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dreams, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayal, and have you become shriveled and closed from the fear of future pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own. If you can dance with the wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, be realistic, or to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself, if you can bear the accusations of betrayal and not betray your own soul, if you can be faithful and therefore be trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it's not present every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done for the children. It doesn't interest me what you know or how you come to be here. I want to know if you can stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Quite an invitation, isn't it?
Oh,
And
beautiful.
how do you condense a statement like that? How do you condense it down to a few words? And I can tell you the invitation that I heard, and it was, Jim, will you be fully alive? Will you be fully human, fully divine? And that's what we want Unity of Montreal to be. We want it to be a place where you can be fully alive, where you can be yourself, warts and all. A place that if you can do that, then the guilt, the shame, the regret that you may have can just begin to fade away. I want to voice for you in just a moment one of the greatest breakthroughs, spiritual breakthroughs of my life. And it's something that changed me and will continue to be a changing agent for me. Let me voice it for you. Unless we are willing to accept our humanity, we won't be able to express our divinity. That was one of the greatest realizations of my life. Let me voice that for you again. Unless we are willing to accept our humanity, we won't be able to express our divinity. Our humanity is part of the overall divine plan. We are born of water and spirit. Our humanity, I have come to learn, is just as precious as our divinity. Jesus is standing before the tomb of Lazarus. He knows what's going to happen. He knows that in a few moments that Lazarus is going to walk out of that tomb. And the family has gathered behind Jesus. And because they're there at the tomb again, they're crying, they're sobbing, they're moaning as part of the expression of the Jewish faith with the death of a loved one. And so Jesus is standing there. He knows what's going to happen. And then we have this recorded, and you probably remember this from your Sunday school days. What's the shortest verse in the Bible? You remember that? It is, Jesus wept. Here's the question. Why did Jesus weep? He knew what was going to happen. There was going to be incredible joy in just a few moments. Why did he weep? I think he wept because he heard the expression of humanity behind him. He heard those sobs and those cries, and that humanity touched him. That's often the way it is with me. If I was to be here before you, and some of you that know me know I've done this many times, I stand before an audience and I cry. And the audience joins me. They don't even know why I'm crying. In fact, I may not even know why I'm crying, but they join me. There is this unity of spirit that comes together, not only in the depth of our spirituality, but in our humanity as well. There were two brothers, and one brother believed that God loved his brother more than he loved him. So he killed his brother. And this murderer was banished to the land of Nod. Nod means aimless or purposeless, wandering. Now, what story is this? This is the story of Cain and Abel. Well, Cain was concerned. He knew the law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He'd killed his brother. He murdered his brother, and so he knew the law. And God put a mark on Cain. The mark of Cain. What was it? It had to be a mark that said, don't harm this one. And so he wouldn't be put to death at the hand of another. But I think the mark of Cain says this: don't harm this one, this is God speaking now, because he's precious to me. Because if he wasn't precious to God, just let him die at the hand of another. He had committed murder. He had murdered his brother. But the mark was placed upon him. Don't harm this one. He is precious to me. He had to be precious to God. In fact, that was one of his problems to begin with. He didn't know or realize that he was precious to God as his brother was precious to God as well. Now, what I'm about to say to you is not in Scripture, but take it in anyway. I speculate that Cain is wandering in the land of Nod. And he comes to people's homes. He's begging. He knocks on the door. You open the door and there's an odor about him. He's all disheveled and they're going to just cast him aside. And they look at him and they see this mark of Cain that says, God speaking, this one is precious to me. And so they invite him in. They give him food. They clean him up. They maybe allow him to wash his clothes, or his clothes are washed, or they give him new clothes before he goes forth out into the world again. And he's puzzled. Why do people treat me this way when I have committed murder? Because they see that mark upon him. They know that he, as it is with every human being, is precious. And so the question for Cain is, how long will it take him to realize that he is precious to God? And that is a question relevant for us. How long will it take us, regardless of the things we've done and left undone and said and not said, and all those, the shame and the regret that we may hold, the guilt that we hold as human beings, how long will it take us to realize that we are precious to God as well? So we all stumble, we all fail, but failure is not the issue. It's not the problem. Think of a child learning to walk. How many times does that child fall down? Over and over again. But the child places no cosmic significance upon the failure. They just get up again. But we, as human beings, we place cosmic significance upon some of our failures from time to time. Our most grievous error is trying to fix and repair ourselves instead of trying to accept ourselves as we are. I'm back to that statement, unless we're willing, excuse me, to accept ourselves as we are, we won't be able to express our divinity. And so what we do one of two things. We either try to, we'll talk about this in a moment, we try to push aside this darkness of our soul, or we try to fix it and repair it. Well, what's really being required of us, our race is human, what's being required of us is that we accept our humanity as it is. We have to keep, I think, coming back to it and back to it. And you know, if you've done something you're not particularly proud of, that keeps coming back and back and back until you resolve it or push it aside. Let me give you an example. It's a positive example, but it illustrates the point of coming back to whatever the issue is again until we learn to accept it. When I was in ministerial school, I had a classmate, his name was Howard Caesar, and he and his wife, Diane, while we were at school, Diane gave birth to their child, Dawn. And when something like that would happen in a class, then the class chaplain would give a blessing. Well, Howard and I were close friends, and so I asked the chaplain if I could give the blessing. And not long before that, I had, in the middle of the night, I had written a poem called Blessing for a Child. And as I wrote the poem, I thought about Nancy's son and my son, Jamie. And as I wrote the blessing and thinking about Jamie, I cried. But it was all done in the privacy of our home, and it was in the depth of night. And so the day of the blessing came, and I remember Howard came up the freight elevator at Unity Village on a motorcycle and kind of waddled the motorcycle into our class. And he had a bunch of cigars he was passing about. It was a very festive, fun occasion. And so the time came for the poem. And so I stood up and I started reading the poem. But what happened was all the emotion that I had felt when the poem was written, it all came back upon me. And so I stumbled and I had great difficulty getting through the poem. And it was very embarrassing for me. I had come to ministerial school from the military, from the Navy. I've been a Navy flyer, been to Vietnam, flown combat missions and so forth. And so here I am, I'm in front of my classmates and I'm crying and I'm humiliated, I'm embarrassed, but I get through it. And then what I do is on my way to work each day, I drive 45 minutes to Woodside Racquet Club in Kansas City, Kansas. I'm a tennis pro there. I teach tennis all day long into the night from 2 in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night. And then I come home. And what I did was I recited the poem over and over again, driving back and forth, trying to be able to do it without the tears. And finally, it takes me about a week, but eventually I accept myself and the tears, and it's okay. This embarrassment and shame, which was rather odd, you got to admit, it is gone. And so what we have to do with these moments of ours, the things that we want to push aside, we need to be with them. We need to accept them as they are. Because we try to push these parts of ourselves aside, but it's like a hurt child. I wanted you to think of it as a hurt child. If there was a hurt child in the room, what would you do? Well, you wouldn't push it aside, would you? You'd run over to the child, you kneel down, you'd be face to face, you'd hold that child, you say, what's wrong? It's going to be okay. How can I help you? That's what you would do with a hurt child. But parts of ourselves, we don't do that. We try to push it aside. Previous attempts at living, and I did that for a long time until that breakthrough came. Unless I'm willing to accept my humanity, I won't be able to express my divinity. When I first came into Unity, it was so positive. And I thought, here's a way to deal with all these parts of myself I want to push aside. I'll just put a candy coating over the top of it, a layer of affirmations and denials. And friends, that's why many people that have been in unity for years and years aren't getting it done. They're not getting it done because they're just kind of coding over those things. And what really needs to happen is we need to bring them out into the light. We need to accept them as they are. Love is the answer. The first thing that love does is that it accepts us as we are. The real good friends you have, what do? They accept you as you are. Years ago, Nancy and I had a not-for-profit corporation called Inner Journey. We had a mailing list of people, and it was a writing ministry. I wrote each month. We had a little newsletter and published books and a number of different things that we did. But we also had a retreat. We had a number of retreats. The very first retreat, we sent out a call. We didn't know if anybody would show up. About 24, 25 people came. People came from Canada, I think. People came from Australia. We were all together, and the first night, we talked briefly about these kinds of things because this idea was just developing in me at the time. And so we talked about our humanity actually being sacred, being precious. And what we did was we were all in a big circle, and there was a candle in the midst of the circle in the center. And after we had talked about these things, I stood in the center of the circle by that Christ candle, and I looked at everybody and I said, won't you accept me just the way I am? And everybody responded, we accept you just the way you are. And then I invited everybody to come forward, and people came one at a time, and they stood in that circle by that Christ candle. And they said, won't you accept me just the way I am? And we all responded, we accept you just the way you are. And it was a beautiful beginning. It set the tone for the whole retreat. And as we were sharing together and people would be talking, someone would just shout out, oh, we accept you just the way you are. So friends, we're born of water and spirit. We are divine. We saw an expression of that with the boy in a transfusion. And you've seen that, you've expressed that in your own life, but we're also human. And they play a role together. Our humanity is what allows us to bring to bear the love that is within us. For us to know that our humanity, it is indeed sacred and it is precious. I would say to you that the mark of Cain is on us all, because God is saying to all the world, of each one of us, don't harm this one. This one is precious to me. And so it is. Amen. Well, friends, we want to take these ideas, we want to take them into prayer and meditation and see if we can do some of this wonderful work of just accepting ourselves as we are. So if you would just close your eyes with me and let's just pause for just a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel the rise and fall of our chest. Just begin with that knowing. The mark of Cain is on me. God is saying to all the world, don't harm this one. This one is precious to me. So I breathe easily. The willingness is rising up within me. The willingness to bring the regrets or the guilt or the shame, the memories, to bring them into the light. Maybe to think of them as that child that is hurt. And now it's not to be pushed aside. In the truest sense, it is as if whatever the memory might be, it's holding out its arms to us, asking us to rush forward, to take it in our arms and in our mind and in our hearts, to accept it as it is. Not to fix or to repair or to hide or to push aside, but just to hold, to accept, to embrace, to come back to it as many times as is required until the peace comes. The shame passes. The guilt is no more. It's just gone. Just love. Then I know with great depth, unless I'm willing to accept my humanity, I won't be able to express my divinity. But on this day, in these moments, I am accepting. My heart is open to encircle and embrace the fullness of my being, my humanity, born of water, born of spirit. Like the child, I fall and I rise again. I look in the mirror and I see the mark of Cain. God saying to all the world, don't harm this one. This one is precious to me. And so I rest now in the silence, knowing that mark is upon me. All is well. In the silence, I rest. And dear friends, as our time of prayer and meditation comes to a close, I ask you to ponder this question in the coming days. If that mark of Cain is truly upon you, and it can be seen as someone opens the door and looks upon you, what is that mark? What does it look like? For truly it is upon you, upon us all. And so it is. Amen.
So
They're all yours, man.
yeah, we're coming back with maybe tears in our eyes and a heart that's open. And I imagine we would love to have some time with Jim to ask some questions. So I don't want to take much of the remaining time. I invite you to unmute yourself in your own way that you want to do this. And just remind you of a couple of things. We are going to hold a candlelight service on the 24th of December. Something we were not really able to do in the winter of Quebec. Often people were really not able to come out on Sunday and then again on the candlelight evening. But now we have this gift of our interconnection across time and space, and we have decided we are going to have a candlelight service on the 24th, 4 o'clock in the afternoon as it gets dark. And of course, I'm going to reach out to Jim and a couple of other people who might join us for that hour, and we will simply light the candles. So mark that. Noon meditation continues faithfully, practicing our discipline, 15 minutes short, 12 o'clock noon. And the love offering, your donation, your support, your practicing giving and receiving, all that we invite with grateful hearts through our online ways of doing it. So donations are your giving, but also you're opening the doors for receiving. So with that, I'm thinking of giving ourselves a little time, what's left, to open up for any questions you might have to Jim. I'm going to stop the recording so there's an element